All right. Well, it's 9:15, and any of my students will tell you I always start my lectures on time. So here we go. We're going to be talking about Ecclesiastes today. Before we listen to a video that kind of gives summary of everything that happens in Ecclesiastes, I wanted to ask you all, what does Ecclesiastes mean? Does anybody know? Is that somebody's name? Is it a term, noun, verb, pronoun, adjective?
Providence.
Well,
One of those. I would say a noun, but I'm not sure.
okay.
Guessing.
Well, something that I don't know the answer, but I think if it's ecclesial, it has to do with the church.
Correct. It does have to do with the church or with clergy.
Clergy, yeah.
When we talk about ecclesiastical, or how did you say it? Ecclesial? Yeah. Okay. All right. So the term itself is actually borrowed from Latin and Greek. It means participant in an assembly of citizens. So in the case of more modern usage of ecclesiastical, it would be an assembly of the church of believers. Okay, and it relates to Christian church and clergy, as we mentioned. All right, I have a disclaimer. Everybody needs to pay attention to this. The teachers are not responsible for any melancholy feelings you may experience while discussing the book of Ecclesiastes. I just want to put that out there because this is a journey that may not always be a happy one.
But there's a time for
okay. Now, so the sound should just come on here, I guess.
The book of Ecclesiastes. It's part of the Bible's wisdom literature, and it opens with this line: the words of Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, in Hebrew, the word Kohelet, it means someone who has gathered people together. And in this case, it's to learn, so it's often translated in English as teacher. And the teacher is said to be a son or a descendant of King David. And so there are different views about who this figure might have been. Many think that it refers to King Solomon, others to maybe one of the later kings of David's line, and still others think that it's actually a later Israelite teacher who has adopted a Solomon-like persona as a teaching aid. Whichever of these views is correct, the key thing is to recognize that the teacher is a character in the book and is different than the author of the book, who remains anonymous. So we do hear the teacher's voice for most of the book, but it's actually a different voice, the author, who introduces us to the teacher in the first sentence and then at the end concludes the book by summarizing and evaluating everything the teacher just said. So the author is someone who wants us to hear all that the teacher has to say and then help us process it and form our own conclusion. So what does the teacher have to say? Well, the author summarizes the teacher's basic message at the beginning and right at the end, and it's Hevel, Hevel. Everything is utterly Hevel. Now, most English Bibles translate this word Hevel as meaningless, but that doesn't quite capture the heart of the idea. In Hebrew, Hevel literally means vapor or smoke, and the teacher uses this word 38 times in the book as a metaphor to describe how life is, first of all, temporary or fleeting, like a wisp of smoke. But secondly, also how life is an enigma or a paradox. Like smoke, it appears solid, but when you try and grab onto it, there's nothing there. So there's so much beauty or goodness in the world, but just when you're enjoying it, tragedy strikes and it all seems to blow away. Or we all have a strong sense of justice, but all the time bad things happen to good people. So life is constantly, it's unpredictable, it's unstable, or in the teacher's words, like chasing after the wind. Hevel. Now that's kind of a downer. So why is he saying all of this? The author's basic goal is he lets the teacher deconstruct. So the author thinks we spend most of our time investing energy and emotion in things that ultimately have no lasting meaning or significance, and he lets the teacher give us a hard lesson in reality. You can see this most clearly in the opening and closing poems, which focus first of all on time and then on death. So the teacher says, you can spend your whole life working and achieving because you think that makes your life meaningful. You should really stop and consider the march of time. For all of the human effort that takes place in the world, nothing really ever changes. So sure, we develop technology and we build nations that rise and fall, but go climb a mountain and see if it cares. It was there long before any of us, and it will be here long after. I mean, no one's even going to remember you or anything you did 100 years from now, but that mountain, it'll still be there. And the ocean will still be breaking on the beach, and the sun will still rise and set. And so time will eventually erase you and me and everything that we care about. And if that's not disheartening enough, the teacher also can't stop talking about death all the way through the book, but especially in this poem near the end. He says, death is the great equalizer, and it renders meaningless most of our daily activities. It devours the wise and the fool, the rich and the poor, no matter who you are, what you've done, good or bad, we're all going to die, and it's inescapable. So with these two ideas in hand, the teacher goes on to consider all the activities and false hopes that we invest our lives in to find meaning and significance, like wealth or career or social status or pleasure. So you think working hard is going to make life worth it? Think about the stress and the toll that that takes on you, all the anxiety and the sleepless nights. And by the time you actually earn some wealth, you're going to be too old to enjoy it anyway. And then by the time that you have to pass it on to someone, they may not even be someone who cares about anything that you did. Or maybe you think pleasure is going to make life worth it for you. Go for it. You know, live for your vacations, live for the weekend party. Monday always comes. Hevel, hevel. Everything is utterly hevel. So what does the teacher advocate then? That we become pure hedonists or relativists? Well, no, that would be hevel too. The teacher acknowledges the ideas from Proverbs that living by wisdom and the fear of the Lord, that these have real advantages. On the whole, life will probably go better for you. See, but the problem is that even living by wisdom and the fear of the Lord, they're hevel too, because they don't guarantee a good life. Good people die tragically, and horrible people live long and prosper. There's just too many exceptions. And so even wisdom is hevel. Again, not meaningless, but an enigma. Wisdom doesn't work the way you think it should all of the time. So what's the way forward in the midst of all this hevel? And here, paradoxically, the teacher discovers the key to the true enjoyment of life under the sun. It's accepting hevel. It's acknowledging that everything in your life is totally out of your control. About 6 different times at some of the bleakest moments in his monologue, the teacher talks about the gift of God, which is the enjoyment of simple, good things in life, like friendship or family, a good meal, or a sunny day. You can't control these things. You're certainly not guaranteed them, but that's their beauty. When I come to adopt a posture of total trust in God, it frees me to simply enjoy my life as I actually experience it, not as I think it ought to be. Because even my expectations about what life ought to be are ultimately hevel. Hevel. Everything under the sun is utterly hevel. And so the teacher's words come to a close. Right here at the end, the author speaks up again, and he brings it all to a conclusion. He says, the teacher's words are very important for us to hear. He likens them to a shepherd's staff with a goad, a pointy end, which might hurt when it pokes you, but he says the teacher is trying to poke you to get you to move in the right direction, towards greater wisdom. The author then warns us that you can actually take the teacher's words too far, and you could spend your whole life buried in books trying to answer life's existential puzzles. Don't try, he says. You'll never get there. And so instead, the author offers his own conclusion, and it's this: fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of humans, for God will bring every deed into judgment, every hidden thing, whether good or evil. And so the author thinks it's good to let the teacher challenge your false hopes and remind you that time and death make most of life completely out of your control. But what gives life true meaning is the hope of God's judgment. The hope that one day God will clear away all of the hevel and bring true justice to our world. And it's that hope that should fuel a life of honesty and integrity before God, despite the fact that I remain puzzled by most of life's mysteries. And that's the wisdom of the book of Ecclesiastes.
All right, I'm going to leave the little chart up on the screen. Is there anything that you heard, and I know it was a lot of information in 8 minutes, that you agree with or disagree with, or does not seem to apply in your modern lives?
I would say it sounds a little like Buddhism.
Like what?
Buddhism.
Oh, okay.
That, everything's always changing and you can't latch on, but yes, I would say a lot of it is pebbles. And that if we try to cling on to something, it often leads to disappointment.
And the last that reminded me of the verse I must have highlighted years ago, chapter 1, it goes, "For in much wisdom is much grief, and that he increaseth knowledge increases sorrow."
So what do you think about that? He kind of mentioned that toward the end of his monologue. That the author of Ecclesiastes is saying, don't waste your time reading a lot of books and gaining wisdom and thinking that you're learning about the world or life or anything like that, because it's all hevel anyway. How do you feel like about that?
Makes me think I should quit seminars.
That might be overstating.
Yeah.
Maybe overstating it. I feel like the author, although, I will say this is one of my favorite books of the Bible, but I haven't studied it in depth, so I'm really excited to. But I feel like the author is more like knocking down idols, because we tend to take temporal things and make them ultimate, whether we're ultimizing money or career, or he listed them off, or the video game, family, just anything can become ultimate. Maybe deep down it's just the fear of death, or I don't know.
And what did he say was the important thing of all these things that are unimportant? What did the teacher lift up according to the monologue as the thing that we should cling to?
God and following his commandments.
So I think even though it's very complicated, there's a simple essential message that everything in life is probably not as important as God. It says fearing God. We would probably say having a relationship with God. A lot of us don't maybe like the idea of a God that we have to be fearful of. So I think that's sort of the core thing to keep in mind as we're going forward the next week or two. I don't know how long we'll spend on this, but it will take us at least 2 weeks. All right.
There's a
anything
little
else?
bit of I don't know if you call it a dichotomy or what, but we're told that God came to forgive us for our sins, and yet we worry about judgment in the next life. And in the service today, in Hebrews, he says something about he comes and he will forget your sins and all. But then it says, but judgment day, he's gonna review all that with you.
Does get kind of confusing, doesn't it?
Anybody else feel like hevel ended up being kind of a cuss word at the end there? Like it's all just hevel.
Yeah.
Hevel this and hevel that.
Easy come, easy go. What did you think in the light of our 21st century, just the way that civilization is now compared to civilization 1,000 years before Christ, and the essential way that people live their lives? Would you agree or disagree with the statement, there's nothing new under the sun?
Nothing has really changed. You have some newer technology, but other than that, pretty much the same thing. We're still trying to figure out why we're here. We're still trying to just have that peace of mind. We still have taxes that are ridiculous. And we still have wars like all around us.
All right. So philosophically speaking, maybe there's nothing new under the sun, but technologically speaking, or in terms of the progression of humankind. I would say there's new things under the sun. We make new discoveries all the time that to me would apply to that statement.
Well, to me, it means we still make idols out of what we want.
Money, technology.
Yeah, that hasn't changed.
Celebrity.
For sure. Okay. All right, well, let's learn a little bit more about Ecclesiastes and then we'll get into
I thought we learned everything.
reading the book.
Level.
Well, there's a few more things. We're going to talk a little bit about who this was. So I'm a little unclear from the video that if Solomon was the person who conceived of or wrote Ecclesiastes, was he the author or was he the teacher? Because it sounds like there's at least two people involved in the writing here. So I don't know which one Solomon might be. But anyway, this book is presented as the words of somebody called Kohelet. Is that a name, or what have you ever heard about Kohelet?
Nothing.
It's not a name, it's actually an office, and it means teacher, a person who has convened people together in order to give instruction to them. So I guess for this morning, I'm your Kohelet. You've convened together and I've charged with teaching you. So traditionally, the book of Ecclesiastes is believed to have been written by Solomon because the first sentence right out of the gate was the words of the teacher, the son of David, the king in Jerusalem. So if we take that literally, then we would probably be talking about King Solomon. Whoever the teacher was, the author of our other book that our instructors have been using to prepare for these discussions on wisdom literature, whoever that person was apparently enjoyed a position of some influence or affluence and privilege in Israel. He certainly was a keen observer of life and had what the author of our text would say was a penetrating insight into human experience. And the basic themes of Ecclesiastes are the meaning of life, the unfairness of fate, and the inevitability of death. And I think we got that from the little monologue that we listened to. Anything else that you picked up in that we ought to consider this morning?
Don't worry about your neighbor, because no matter what type of person he is, he may do better than you.
What was that song back in the 70s or 80s? Don't worry, be happy. All right. So a little bit about the date and the setting. So there are scholars who will continue to assert that Ecclesiastes was written around the 10th century BCE, which would be the timing, if there was a King Solomon indeed, that would be about the time that he would have lived. But since the 1600s, for 400 years now in Bible scholarship, the belief has been that this actually is a later work. It doesn't come to us from the 10th century BCE. And the reason that scholars have developed this line of thinking is because in some cases, the language or the linguistics or the descriptions of things in the book of Ecclesiastes do not match up with that kind of antiquity. They're more recent. For instance, there's the use of a Persian term for paradise that's written in here. Israel didn't really have any influence from Persia until the 6th and 5th centuries BC. So if that word came from their experience under the domination of the Persians for a while, certainly it had to have been later than 10th centuries. Also, scholars feel like the writings in Ecclesiastes are similar to the books of Daniel, Esther, Ezra, and Nehemiah, and those have all been pretty much validated to have been written in the 2nd to the 3rd century BCE. So much more recent than 10 centuries before Christ. Also, in the discussions in Ecclesiastes, there is an implication that is based on a commercial economy rather than an agrarian economy. So agrarian would have more likely been a 10th century BCE, whereas by the time this is likely written, there's lots of trade going on. We know that Palestine was the center of many of the trade routes from the east to the west, and so it sounds like much more that type of setting. So most of scholars now believe it was probably written about 200 or 300 years before Jesus. All right, we talk about genres in scripture, and so let's talk about the genres in Ecclesiastes. First of all, it's part of the wisdom literature, so there we can anticipate that wisdom is going to be part of that. I encountered a new word in my studies, sapiential. Has anybody ever heard of that before? Sapiential means wisdom. So if you hear somebody, it's a good idea when you hear a new word, you learn a new word, use it once today, and then it'll stick. You'll remember it. So maybe when you're talking with other people at church, you can say, "Well, that was a really sapiential service." And they'll say, "What are you talking about?" Well, there's a lot of wisdom there.
I hope it will be.
That was a sapiential sermon they're going to get, right?
Is that where the Homo sapien comes?
It might be. I don't know.
I don't know.
It's a book of sayings, so it has similarities to the book of Proverbs. I think Dennis talked about Proverbs. There are aphorisms in Ecclesiastes. Aphorisms are statements of little truths. What do you believe as truths that you live by? That would be an aphorism. And it explores the question of human significance to assess why a person who appears to have all the blessings that are promised by traditional wisdom is still unable to find meaning in life. Let's pause for just a moment and think about what is meaningful in life to us, to each of us. And the question or the statement that I hear often is, we are searching for meaning. We're on a quest for finding meaning in our lives. I don't remember who said it. I think it was this is a more modern person who said, you don't find meaning, you don't discover meaning, you create it for yourself. You create meaning in your life by your choices. So discuss. What do you think? Do we discover meaning or do we create our own meaning?
I think it's a combination of both, because some things we have to work to get to, and other things just seem like they're there already. And we have to decide what we accept and what we don't accept in our realities.
I personally, I find the statement that we create our own meaning, I find it troubling, but I can't necessarily refute it. I'd have to really think about whether that's a convincing argument, but I would rather recognize something intrinsically meaningful than just say, well, it's all relative. Because that's, if you've heard me share in class before, relativism does bother me, and yet it's I can't, like I said, I can't refute it all the way.
I think we talked about a previous discussion about locus of control. Do you remember that discussion about whether we feel like we have control over the choices of our lives, what our lives are going to look like, where we're going to go, what's going to happen, versus the person who feels maybe somewhat like those choices are out of their hands, that they're more kind of at the mercy of what happens in the world. And I have a great sense in Ecclesiastes as I've been reading this that that's a very external locus of control, that we don't have, our choices don't matter. It's just whatever happens to us. It's all hevel, and we have to just accept that it is. Whereas somebody who has that strong internal locus probably is the person who might say, I can create meaning in my life. I can find the things that are meaningful to me and develop them.
I think some of the meaning in our lives is determined by our nationality or our, if you were Jewish, born Jewish, if you were born in this culture, then you're going to have different leadings that you're going to start down different paths than you might if you were in another.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Tradition.
I was thinking about Margaret from her service yesterday. It sort of seemed to me that she created meaning for you, for her,
And perhaps for others, it sounded like.
for
Yeah.
others too. And teaching, that was one of her goals, to teach
Yeah.
people to appreciate music and the rest of their life to enjoy it.
And maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe she discovered meaning in music and then decided to,
Well, I don't know if she found it and then
yeah,
from that,
From what I gathered when I was there, from all the talk, that she made it where music is life. Everybody, or at least one of the most important components. Because those been all the people who gave their memories of her and the family, and even in the service of how important music was to her.
she was, very much a great role model. And we saw the impact of that on Mr. Potter, that we had his name yesterday, that talked, yeah, Joe Potter. I think that was very, very evident that. The other thing about Ecclesiastes, that I think it's our author said this, it's all moral and no story. What does that mean to you? Compare it to the book of Job.
Well, I would say that it's sayings, so they're quotations of pearls of wisdom.
Yeah.
But it's not like Ruth and Naomi. It's not like
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he's saying this is all.
instruction.
This is
Yeah.
a little thought game that the author of Ecclesiastes is kind of playing with himself and developing, as opposed to Job, where there was a very distinct story about the collusion between God and Satan, and we're going to take everything away from this guy and see if we ruin his life, is he going to denounce God? And there was a story to support the discussions that came through the book of Job, which we don't really have that kind of a story in Ecclesiastes. We're just stuck with all of the discussions.
Paul, I think they both refute have retrograde theology that shows up more in Proverbs.
Mhm.
Basically, there's no direct line between being good and success and being bad and failure.
Yeah.
So I think they both tackle that slightly different ways.
Yeah. Or at least forestall the judgment till the afterlife.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, all through history, we've struggled to understand why good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people, and how is that possible in a universe where we think that there's a just God? And so this is another exploration of that theme. How do we explain this? How do we understand? And the author, I think, of Ecclesiastes would say, just fear God, trust God. God's in charge. The mountains have been here for a long time. We didn't build them. And just keep pressing forward. But we'll see how we feel after we read the book. All right, structure and unity. There's really no order to the book versus one that is carefully structured. The author of the textbook says there's some inconsistencies in voice and statements that have led some scholars to even believe that maybe this is a book that multiple people have contributed to, that somebody started writing down his thoughts, his cogitations, his philosophies, and then over the centuries, others came and contributed on top of that, which we know the Jewish rabbis had a tendency to do that. I mean, scripture was a very dynamic thing in Judaism, and even though they didn't rewrite the scripture itself, there certainly is lots of commentary.
Well,
So-
yeah, on the Talmud. I mean,
Yeah.
there's space around
Oh yeah, all around the
all around
borders,
for
yeah.
other people to add
Yeah,
to their
yeah,
thoughts.
and
to
that's,
even modern
I
day.
think maybe that's some of what was going on, that some of this is, original thought, and then the others are maybe responses to
Maybe
what
it's
some of those thoughts
anthology.
were. An anthology? Could be.
Kind
So,
of seems, since it is set in the with the teacher talking kind of, it kind of seems like a big lesson plan of the teachers. Here's what I preach, this is how I teach.
Mhm.
Now you can go forward and teach it too.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the next thought on the slide here. You know, it says that they're trying to recreate vicariously the experience of the author in the reader. That will be all of us. And then that way the person is teaching us how to think as well as what to think, if you follow their line of reasoning. All right, the purposes of Ecclesiastes describes the basic human hunger or need to see how life in total is meaningful. You know, it'd be interesting to have just a discussion on that for an hour and see what people hunger for as far as meaning in their lives. What are we missing? You know, what more could we be doing to promote meaning and to find meaning? Human boredom with the joyless routine of a typical life. I would hate to think that life was completely joyless. I've really had a pretty good life most of the time. I know not everybody does, but to say that we have a joyless life is kind of depressing.
I kind of think of the early founding of this country and some of them as to how people were supposed to live their life.
Yeah.
It seemed pretty joyous.
Could be pretty joyless, I guess. Yeah, I suppose if you lived in the, you know,
laughing.
if you lived in the Middle Ages and the plague came through and, you know, something like that might.
Even like she says, beginning of this country when people went west and
Yeah.
you know had all their possessions with them, and then it just happened to dump them along the way.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking more along the Puritans and their life structure sounded
I really
completely
like the
joyless. If you found joy, you were doing something wrong.
Sinning,
Yeah.
you might be a witch.
Anyway, so Ecclesiastes then calls for humans to develop a God-centered worldview in order to find significance in life. And then again, the emphasis on everything is hevel. Hevel is another way with a B as opposed to a V. So I think that's the Hebrew word is interchangeable with hevel. Again, that means vapor and breath and some other things that we'll look at here.
Paul, before you move on with the slides, I was going to share a brief little current events thing. Mike Tyson, who recently went back in the ring with Jake Paul. I don't follow that much, but I saw an interview of Mike Tyson. He was interviewed by this, I think it was a teenage girl, and she was talking about what is going to be your legacy. And I thought it was so striking. He said, basically, I don't believe in the word legacy. Legacy doesn't mean nothing, he said. Skipping down, he says, so I'm going to die. I'm quoting Tyson directly. I want people to think that I'm this, I'm great. He continued, no, we're nothing. He says, we're just dead, we're dust, we're absolutely nothing. Our legacy is nothing. And so I was like, oh my gosh. That is straight out of Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, it sounds like he's been reading Ecclesiastes, doesn't it?
More interesting.
But I will say that what I'm seeing on online spaces is there is a growing movement of stoicism, especially among young men. And I don't know what to make of that, but I just think that our society, as we become more technological based, we've kind of gotten out of touch with, you know,
Each other.
Yeah.
each other and purpose.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to share
Yeah,
that.
that's very interesting. You know, regardless of what Mike Tyson's reasons were for getting back in the ring at the age of 58,
Yeah.
I think the overarching thing that I was aware of is there was a lot of money to be made in that for him and for everybody else that was promoting it. And the guy that fought him, who everybody knew he was going to probably win. So, you know, it's,
We did.
yeah,
I think 27-year-old or something.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, that was interesting, and then ended up Netflix didn't work very well, so I don't know how many people actually saw it.
Mike Tyson also said, everybody has a plan, don't get punched in the mouth.
Yeah. That's true. All right, I know you can't read this, but I just want, this was something I found that kind of shows all of the different possible meanings of Hebel or Hevel. It does mean smoke, it means vapor, but it also is used in Ecclesiastes to imply delusion, emptiness, or something that's empty, something that's fleeting, something that's fraudulent, futility, idols, mere breath, nothing, useless, vanity, vanity of vanities, vapor, and worthless. What's a vanity of vanities, and why does Ecclesiastes will be bringing that up? So I'm just curious that we define that first. Life is a vanity of vanities.
The worst of all vanities.
Okay, so how is life a vanity?
Well, you try to make yourself known and appreciated, and you know in the end that it's not going to normally make a huge difference.
Okay.
Well, isn't vain and vanity going to have some kind of common connection?
Yeah, so I'm asking how is vainness or vanity, how does this apply in our discussion?
Well, I would say vanity of vanities is more than just wanting to be appreciated. It's trying to push yourself to be the best of all.
They're the greatest of all
Yeah.
vanities. Yeah, so the Old Testament uses those kind of terms to accentuate this is the greatest or the most important of all of these things. So vanity of vanities, Lord of lords, God of gods, King of kings, all of those kinds of things. This is the top of those.
Captain Bennetts on chapter 2, roughly. We're talking about the vanity, but it seems like it's anything that doesn't bring you closer to the Spirit of God. So the vanity of vanity could be like one of the, not the word, but like one of the bigger things that is going to keep you away from being closer to God.
Mhm.
So like if you're always just focused on pleasure, well, I'm not talking about like reading, I'm talking about like money, and then that's going to be the opposite of what God wants. People don't want to focus on the money and
yeah, so that's I think what the author is saying is that it's vain to think any of this other stuff matters. Only fear of God matters. And if it's the vanity of all vanities, then if that is your focus on life, is thinking that you matter, then we need to listen to the prophet Mike Tyson and maybe it doesn't matter quite so much, right?
They're not as important as you think.
Yeah, exactly.
we're only like a grain of sand.
Mm-hmm.
The definition I thought really fit with Ecclesiastes is fleeting.
Fleeting.
There's so many things you think are important that are really fleeting. You give them too much. Yeah.
How many times do you have a fleeting moment in your day, in the course of your day? So I had one this morning. I pretty much every morning take the dog down to the lake and we play with the tennis ball. And on a beautiful morning like today, where the sun is shining on the lake and the water is just like glass and the trees are still dropping their leaves, it's like for 5 minutes, I can just stand there and say, I really appreciate this moment. But then it's gone. Then I got to get the dog back home and get ready for church and come and teach class.
And eventually get the rake out and get the links.
Eventually, yeah. No, we have people who do that for us, thankfully.
Well, it also could
Used to be
be,
me.
you can also think about, it's a fleeting moment that can also ruin your day.
That's true.
Yeah.
You can have one encounter with somebody that just sets your whole day on a bad moment. And if you don't like stop and think, okay, why am I so hooked on that one moment? It can just keep spiraling and spiraling.
So it's not a fleeting moment anymore, right?
Yeah,
We
but it's
make
just
it,
like a
but we've done
fleeting
that.
encounter that
Yeah.
causes
Yeah,
havoc.
no, I totally understand what you're saying, but we let these beautiful fleeting moments go and say, okay,
Yeah.
I'm glad I had it, but then I'll take the memory with me or whatever. But for some reason, if something bad happens, we can't let that just go away. We can't let go of it, can we? That's interesting contrast. Thank you, April. All right, so the themes, true meaning must come from the outside, something that is outside the temporal. The term temporal usually refers to time, so something in the time of our lives. So in the temporal created sphere, it's sort of while we exist here on the earth, I think is what that means. Fear God and keep his commandments. That's definitely a theme that we talked about. It is possible to find enjoyment, so there is hope. We can rejoice in what we can produce with the gifts that we have, but we are limited by the impending reality of death. Even though it starts to sound a little bit better than the teacher brings us back and we have to confront reality. All right, the dominant theme is that life is all Hebel or Hebel. The world is not as tidy as we'd like to think that it would be. It's cramped, it's unfriendly, it's less promising than conventional wisdom suggests. And humans hunger to see how life fits together. God's purposes aren't always readily discerned by human understanding. And so consequently, we become overwhelmed with the meaninglessness of human experience. Thoughts about that? Or about the previous slide?
Well, I think that last half there, humans hunger to see how life fits together. I think tragedies fit into that a lot because, like you said, you got it going along pretty good, and then massive flood comes along and wipes it all away. And you're trying to figure out your life, maybe even your job disappears because your employer lost everything he had and decides to just give it up. And you're trying to figure out, what do I do now since I've lost everything? And, how could God let this happen to me? It does overwhelm, and it makes you wonder, what did I do you, God? I was just living my life. Kind of like
Is
Job.
it a burden that we humans have to bear, that we have this hunger, that this existential need to affirm our worth by what we do, or that we've created something, or that we'll be remembered? I look at my dog every day when we go out and play at the lake, and she's not thinking about her legacy. She's thinking, throw the dang ball. Let's just live in the moment. Let's have the moment that we've got right now.
Yeah.
At what point did we, in the progression of human existence, come up with this idea that we need to matter, that we need to be remembered, that we need to leave some kind of a legacy? Margaret had a beautiful legacy that will always be a part of this congregation as long as it exists, I suppose, and certainly in our lives.
Well, we have that darn little thing of our self-esteem.
Ego.
That
Ego, yeah.
that makes us who we are. And it has so many dings against it on a daily basis, even, that it's hard to, I think that's why we hunt so much for a meaning in life, because we want to try to improve our self-esteem and our whole being.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's a real big climb up that mountain.
Mm-hmm. But it is, can we all accept that?
It's not a big climb for everyone.
It is
Some
a part.
people live all ego.
Yeah.
But I guess, can we accept that it's just part of being human, that we deal with that? And I think the author of our book, Ecclesiastes, certainly was sensitive to that.
There is some good to that. If we all just figured it's air, it's going to blow away, maybe we wouldn't accomplish the things that we do. And each generation does sometimes, often, build on the previous thing. And what we do earlier in life builds on what we do later in life builds on what we do earlier. So there's something to be said for that motivation to be remembered, to create something that's worthwhile, something. At least we hope we do.
Yeah. Well, and things were different in the times that this was written too. I think we have to kind of keep that in mind. If you look at, again, the progression of humanity, if we can accept that humans have been on this earth for 50 to 100,000 years, perhaps longer. We don't know. Most of the knowledge in that 100,000 year span has come in the last 100 years. Most of what we know about the universe is right where we are right now. So the author of the book of Ecclesiastes, things were not too much different in his time than they were at the time of Jesus, even though several hundred years went by. The time of Jesus, things were not too much different 300 or 400 years later as the church was being formed. But then all of a sudden now we're in an age where things are moving pretty fast. Who was it that said that? Keep your eyes open, things move, life moves pretty fast. And if
Ferris
you think
Bueller.
you might, yeah, Ferris Bueller, you might miss something.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Going for the grades today.
So it's, there's a historical thing that we got to think about with this too, just in terms of where we've been and where we're at.
Well, I'm going to go back to Buddhism. So the 4 tenets of Buddhism.
Now you say you're going to go back to Buddhism. That means you're leaving us for today.
I meant that, I mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
But Buddhism, the first thing is that life is suffering, and that we suffer because we have attachment, and the attachment causes suffering. So to cure suffering, you have to free yourself from all the attachment so that you could, and then there's the Eightfold Path, which you have to go into a lot more after that. But
now, what is it? I know there's like counselors, psychologists, and stuff now are telling people to learn to embrace the suffering and accept that it's there. Is that part of Buddhism too, or is that something else?
I don't think they tell you to embrace the suffering. They're just trying to teach you how to
Live with it.
Well, you can end suffering by realizing that everything is hevel.
You change your perspective of it.
Yeah,
It's
well,
okay.
and you learn to let go of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, now there have been a couple of things I've even read through this class in transformational leadership, where yes, you have to embrace your suffering to let it go, acknowledge it, say this is where it is, and I mean, you don't wallow in it.
Yeah, no, I
But
think you can say, I accept that this has happened. And the next
And
part of the
you-
sentence is, but I'm still here.
Yeah, well, and that, yes, you acknowledge your feelings.
Yeah.
And you feel it, and then hopefully you're able to move on.
Or did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, exact what she just said, it's more of they are teaching you like. I had a Buddhist monk come into my theology class I was taking in college. It's mostly like you can realize you don't really own anything except yourself. So by saying, "Oh, this is mine," that's when the attachment starts, and it's taken away either by God or because you do something to have it taken away. That's where you start suffering because you're thinking, "Well, I thought this was mine."
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you just are like borrowing it. It's not really yours to begin with.
We're reminded that we can't take it with us, but I think some of the pharaohs tried, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, the belly of the king, belly of the queen.
Well, and even some of the first peoples, they get buried with.
I just saw something about that.
All right, so
Food and-
kind of the last thing that I wanted us to think about, we learned from a previous book that we were studying that sometimes after Jesus, the early theologians and scholars began to look back into the New Testament and reinterpreting some of that as evidence for the coming of Christ. Okay, the coming of Christ, the crucifixion and all that. So I'm asking you to step into the shoes of somebody who's Jewish, and then you can remain in your Christian shoes for the other part. What might be the two perspectives about the book of Ecclesiastes from a Jewish point of view and from a Christian point of view? And there's a specific reason that I chose those pictures for this slide. So look for hints there.
So we have a picture of Moses and then Christ.
Well, we
Okay.
have.
Okay,
picture
so
of
what's
with the
Moses
law.
is holding the law? Okay.
And the law in
So
Jewish is everything. Follow the law.
And
Or
then
you'd be-
Christ is leaving the tomb. I think that's what that picture is supposed to be, so.
So,
And he came as the fulfillment of the law.
From Christian.
yeah,
But there's Mount Sinai behind Moses. That's where you encounter that.
So I guess my point in this was to get you to think about how a Jewish person would interpret Ecclesiastes as fear God, follow the law, do good things, which really that's what Judaism is about, is
Yep.
living a life of good deeds, as opposed to the salvation story that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, that we're forgiven, that maybe we don't have to worry about the bad things because Christ has gone on before.
yeah, I would say that for the Judaism side, they don't think so much about the next life.
Right.
Yeah.
Do it here.
Do it here.
Do your best here.
No, I just brought that up because the author of the text that we're using mentioned, brought Christianity into, he's an evangelical Christian, so I
Mhm.
wouldn't be surprised that he would interpret something like that into Ecclesiastes. I just didn't know if anybody else had feelings or thoughts that way.
There's one thing about this guy is called teacher. But I've read that he called the law, the Old Testament, but better understanding would be the teaching. So when you think of, they've got the Ten Commandments, if you think of the Old Testament as teachings, that kind of is what this teacher guy is doing. I mean, it has a different meaning to me when I think of it as these instructions, teachings, not laws.
He's reiterating the Ten Commandments, but doing it in a way where how he's reiterating it in a way where reflects how people live their daily lives. So he's making it relatable, going, okay, if you're the rich person, this is what most rich people do, but maybe the poor person might have better life because they already realize they don't really have anything but maybe their health and their life, so they're going to be probably more in tune with the message, saying like, okay, everything's practically vapor or travel, or a rich guy's going like, what do you mean? This is either he made a fortune or generational wealth. I'm like, this is mine. That's mine. What do you mean I'm going to give it up? And they don't know. Like we said before, you don't take it with you, even though cultures have tried. It's like they're still just rust in the ground.
I wonder if the writer of Job had read the book of Ecclesiastes. Maybe, if I don't know, maybe Job would have thought differently about losing all of his lands and cattle and families. He would have just said, "Oh, it's just
It's
devil anyway. It's just paper."
Although it's kind of hard to think of your kids, it's just vapor.
Yeah. Or stardust.
Yeah.
Like that. Who was it that said
Sure.
we're all stardust?
Carl Sagan.
Carl
Yeah.
Sagan. Yeah.
Well, what I will say about the ancient writers is that some of them
We are.
they were very insightful. We talked about the knowledge we've gotten in the last 100 years. We've learned a lot about the physical universe that they did not know back then. But I would say in mass, we are in some ways a less introspective society. We don't have time to think. So so those ancient writers, they had a lot of introspection, even if they didn't understand what the atomic structure of XYZ was.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I agree with that, what you're saying. And I wondered about that when we were talking about the Gnostics. And who is the guy that wrote 5 volumes of why Gnosticism was wrong? Who's got that kind of time?
Well, they did have time back then.
They have a lot of time on their hands
Well,
back
and
then.
Neil deGrasse Tyson
All right,
would tell you the
so
universe is
we
trying
have
to kill you.
about 5 or 4 minutes. I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and just read the first chapter of Ecclesiastes. There's only 12 chapters. I don't know how Jonathan will propose to do it for next week. But we'll just read the first chapter just to get a flavor of what's to come, and then he can begin leading the discussion however he wants to do it. So this is Ecclesiastes 1. The words of the teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the teacher right out of the gate. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What do people gain from all the toil at which they toil under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hurries to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north, round and round goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full, to the place where the streams flow. There they continue to flow. All things are wearisome, more than one can express. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been in the ages before us. The people of long ago are not remembered, nor will there be any remembrance of people yet to come by those who come after them. I, the teacher, when king over Israel and Jerusalem, applied to my mind to seek and to search out wisdom, all that was done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. I saw all the deeds that are done under the sun, and I see all is vanity and a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, I have acquired a great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my mind has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a chasing after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and those who increase knowledge increase sorrow. And that's your happy little verse for this week. We'll save chapter 2 for next week.
So I'm going to find thorough with you.
I have a
Whatever.
homework assignment for folks. Homework assignment is to go through Ecclesiastes. Please read chapter 2 to the end and come up with a favorite verse. And if you don't have time for that, Google favorite verses out of Ecclesiastes. And the second thing is to have you consider why this book was included in the canon of Scripture. You're part of the group that has to decide what the canon of Scripture is going to look like, and I want to know why you put this book into the Old Testament. So that's all.